Great to see so many people live in color in your physical form. This is great. The acoustics is also different than in a Zoom call. Is that meant to be this loud? Yeah, little less, I guess. Okay, cool, great. Then I don't need to whisper. Great to see you also. Welcome to our joint side event. Is the acoustics fine now? It still sounds odd. But if it's okay for you? Okay, cool. Welcome to our session on what is needed and how to get there. So we will focus on scenarios and concrete action on decarbonizing transport. We'll take an urban angle. This is a joint session by the Urban Living Lab Center and the World Resources Institute. My name is Oliver Lahr. I run the Urban Living Lab Center, which is a UN Habitat collaborating center based at the Wuppertal Institute, the Technical University Berlin, and the MIT. And I'll just kick us off briefly. We'll then hand over to Heather Thompson, the CEO of the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, who will introduce the Compact Cities Electrified scenarios, the work together done with UC Davis, which will give us an overall picture on the way to get to zero and the most efficient and cost-effective way of doing so, focusing on compact urban cities, on the modal shift, and a focus on the electrification, in particular of those modes that are most resource and energy efficient, shared and public transport opportunities to electrify. And then I'll hand over to my colleague Ben Welly from the World Resources Institute and the co-host here. And we'll dive into a discussion following up from Heather's presentation, but then also with a panel of colleagues who will share insights from implementation-oriented projects from around the world. And throughout the session, we'll have various opportunities to discuss, ask questions. So sharpen your pencils on, note some of the questions for our distinguished panelists here, and then Marusha Kardama from Slokat will round us up and show us the way towards COP27 and beyond. And this will be our session. It is already, I managed to get the room full and wait until the door is closed so that Heather has a great and excellent opportunity to provide us with an overview on the scenarios on compact cities electrified. Heather, over to you.
Thank you, Oliver, for the great introduction of the session, and so nice to be with all of you here today. It's such a sunny day. It's a tragedy to be inside, but at least we have a nice big window there so we can get some glimpse of the sunshine. It's my honor to present this study today. If you ask tough questions, I'll pass it on to my colleagues who actually did the work, but it's my honor to present. I have my colleague Taylor from ITDP, and I think Lou Fulton will be joining us. I don't see him yet here in the audience from UC Davis, but they're the ones that cranked out the modeling work. But I'm going to start with an overview. Whoops. Make sure I can do this. All right, so I am here to present on one of our recent studies that we released late last year, and we are continuing to promote because I think the messages in this report are so important for the world to hear as we move to focusing more on climate change and climate change goals in the transportation sector. So this is actually a fourth in a series of studies that we've done in partnership with UC Davis. And the goal of each of these studies has been to inform our climate targets at the COP. So we've released each of these studies around the time of the COP, hoping to influence discussions there. And so again, this is the fourth in the series. In this particular study, what we decided to focus on was the role of electrification in the transportation sector. For all of you that follow the climate negotiations, you may know that last year was an especially important year for the transportation sector because for the first time ever, the transportation sector was actually recognized as one of the most important sectors for getting to our our climate goals. So it was a huge victory, but we could see with the UK presidency of the COP that they were very focused on the role of electrification. And electrification, getting fossil fuels out of the transportation sector by moving all of our vehicles to be electric vehicles, is absolutely essential to meeting our goals. But at ITDP, where we focus a lot on public transportation, walking and cycling, we felt that we wanted to make sure that electrification wasn't seen as the only solution, but that the importance that it must be balanced along with a focus on compact city development, public transportation, walking, and cycling was really important message. So that was the reason for us to do this modeling. I should back up and say a little bit more about ITDP in case you all don't know about ITDP. So again, it's the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy. We are a nonprofit organization with more than 35 years of history working around the world. We're headquartered in New York, but we have offices throughout the world that are staffed by local experts, and most of our work focuses on the global south. And the whole idea is to try and help those cities that are growing immensely to avoid some of the mistakes that we have, especially in the United States, and becoming so car dependent, and instead really focusing on having smaller cities that are oriented around transportation. The transportation planning is not an afterthought, but really we're planning our cities to be transit-oriented designed, and with public transportation, walking, and cycling at the core. So again, we released this study late last year in an effort to make sure that as the climate negotiations go forward, there's a balanced approach on both electrification, public transportation, walking, and cycling. So this, again, is a fourth in a series that we did in partnership with UC Davis. Also really important was that we had review by a number of partners to make sure that our study was solid, but also so that there could be more alignment in the transportation community amongst nonprofits. So we had review from ClimateWorks Foundation, WRI, IEA, ITF, where we are here today, Global Fuel Economy Initiative, as well as our partners at ICCT. And all of the modeling that is the basis of this really is kind of in line with other models that some of these institutions are doing as well. So this is kind of a snapshot of the summary, and I want to share this with you first, and then I'll go into some of the details of the modeling and the assumptions behind behind the model. So this is a cool little infographic that kind of gives the summary here. And what you can see is in the middle here, there is this circle, and that inner circle is essentially the carbon budget that we have to stay within in order to meet our climate targets. And so this modeling effort was focused on 4 scenarios. So up in the top left corner, you'll see the business as usual scenario. If we are just staying on the trajectory of having more vehicles and more fossil fuels, obviously we don't stay within that carbon budget within the middle. But what we also found, and what this study is really important in showing, is that if we just focus on the top right-hand corner, which is all electrification only, we also don't get to our target. If we focus just on compact city walking and cycling and public transportation, we don't get to our target. The only way we get to our target is when we have, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, that we really work on all of these things in concert together. Essentially, what we're looking to do is keep the number of private vehicles on the road to a minimum, and then electrifying all of those vehicles that are left. So I'm going to go into more detail about the assumptions that are behind the model. So this is a little bit more of a nerdy diagram, not so cute as the infographic before, but just to give you a sense of all of the different models and the different scenarios that we looked at. So here on the left-hand side is where we are a few years ago with 2015. We have the series in the middle, which is looking at, again, the business as usual, the high EV scenario, the high shift scenario, which is the walk, cycle, public transportation, and compact compact city development. And then lastly, those two together, both for looking out to 2030, which we've been thinking about as being so far away, but now it's just right around the corner, but also looking at 2050, which more of our modeling is starting to look at further along the way. And so these are the assumptions that are behind the model. You can see the different forms of transportation and how they're represented in each of the models. So in the business as usual, of course, there's a huge section for private vehicles that are all traditional combustion engines, whereas when we move further to the right, more of those vehicles become electric, and in the high shift, we have fewer private vehicles and more public vehicles, and those vehicles are traveling fewer miles because we're basing that on compact city development, where people have to travel less distances to get to their destinations, from their homes to their offices to the places that they need to get to. So it's really important that under this assumption, we're not taking access away from people. We want to make sure that people can still reach their destinations. So just to give you a sense of some of the underlying numbers here, demand for urban passenger travel is expected to double by the year 2050 in the business as usual case. So we don't want to take the access away from people. What we want to do is to shift them to more sustainable modes, more public transportation over cars. If you think about electrification, even though there are more vehicles on the road by 2040, all of those vehicles more of those vehicles are meant to be electric. So in the high shift scenario, only 10 to 20% of those vehicles are on the road are still combustion engine. The rest have been converted to electric vehicles. So for example, in Africa, in the business as usual scenario, the amount of car travel is expected to increase by a factor of 5 by 2050. But in the high shift, the number of cars will still increase, but not as much as in the business as usual. Right now, there are about 600,000 buses in India, another example, but by 2050 in the business as usual, there will be about 800,000, but in the high shift scenario, we're expecting there to be 1.7 million buses on the road. So just to give you an idea of how this breaks down to the assumptions at the regional level. So something that was really special about this study is that it's one of the first that really incorporates life cycle emissions. And by that we mean that we looked at what's often called well-to-wheel emissions, looking at the whole life cycle of the production of the vehicle as well as the disposal of used vehicles. We also looked at the carbon and greenhouse gases that are embedded in roads, in highways, the other things that cars are dependent upon in our urban in our urban environment. So this information is available in the full report, but we wanted to make sure at the end of the day the scenarios that we were looking at are conservative. So although we looked at this and we provide this information, the graphs that I will show you in a minute and that infographic that I showed you to begin with do not include the full life cycle emissions. We only included the emissions in the actual vehicle transportation just so that we would stay on par with the more conservative assumptions that other studies include. So for those of you that follow climate talks and climate mitigation, what we often look at are the GHG curves and what it's going to take to stay within our 1.5 degree target. And so essentially all that information that I just described is now put onto a line chart here over time. So if we want to stay within that original carbon budget that I showed in this circle, we basically need to stay within this blue area on the graph. If we follow business as usual, obviously we completely overshoot our target. And as you can see, the only line that maintains being within that carbon budget is the EV plus compact shift scenario. Again, just focusing on compact development and shift doesn't get us there, neither does the electrification only scenario. Again, we looked at a variety of assumptions, and we wanted to make sure that we were being conservative. So one of the things that is embedded when we think about moving all of our vehicles to electrification, of course, is where is that electricity going to come from? Is it coming from fossil fuels, or is it coming from green sources? The previous graph that I showed you has more aggressive assumptions about the move to renewable energy, and it's really taking kind of the best case scenario that we could possibly hope for. This is a more conservative look at that, where we assumed just the policies that have been put into, that have been committed to so far by nations for moving to clean, renewable energy. So it's not as aggressive as we're hoping to get with our climate targets, but it's it's based on what's been agreed so far. So if we take that more conservative approach with the renewable energy, then we can see that it's even more important to have that shift to compact development, public transportation, walking and cycling. You can see that the line, whoops, it didn't show me the right one. There we go. You can see that the yellow line is actually moving up. So with the EV only scenario, you're not getting as far down to the carbon budget that you actually need. So in an even more conservative scenario, it's even more important that we make sure that we're reducing the number of vehicles on the road and electrifying the rest. So along the lines of that message, one of the really important things that we found is not just focusing on the transportation sector, but what the impact is on the electricity sector. And if we focus on that the compact plus EV shift model, it actually reduces our demand for energy by 40%. And we know that we have a huge challenge in moving away from fossil fuels in the electricity sector to renewable energy. So by reducing our demand by 40%, it basically takes the burden down for the electricity sector to move towards renewable energy. So not only is this a benefit for the transportation sector, but also for the energy sector, and more broadly, makes it easier to reach our climate goals. The other thing that we looked at was the cost of investment, both on the private side and the public side for each of these scenarios. And another really interesting finding is that if we focus on that EV plus shift scenario, we can save $5 trillion annually by the year 2050. And that's a huge amount of money. We know that already we're lacking the investment that we need in moving our transportation sector, our electricity sector to be more green, but also we know, especially coming out of the pandemic, that many of our governments are really lacking the investment that they need in basic services like health, education. So, a saving of $5 trillion per year is significant. So this study has gotten a lot of attention. For those of you that are deep in this sector, I think there's begun to be a bit of a tension between those organizations and those entities that are really focusing on promoting electrification versus those organizations and entities that are really focusing on what we call avoid and shift. And there's some tension between those communities. And so we really wanted to come out with this report to again show that it's these two strategies working in synergy with one another that are really going to get us to our goals, and that we need that message to be clear. So far we've promoted this at the global level. We're working on translations into multiple languages where we're going to be promoting it at the regional level as well. But I think this sort of message is one that is really right for the various government audiences out there that are looking to put in place goals that are not only getting us to our sustainability goals, but also getting us to our equity targets. More people use the travel by bus than any other form of transportation. A lot of people rely on their feet to walk to destinations. So to focus on making sure that we have the most equitable solutions that are truly accessible for people, again, we need to focus on promoting public transportation, walking and cycling. So I think this is a really good message for the world to help them shape their policies. And lastly, I just want to play a cute video that has some great messaging, and hopefully we can get the audio going here.
We've seen a lot of news about climate change recently. We might feel overwhelmed. Let's breathe. The situation isn't hopeless. There is a way for us to face the climate crisis, save money, and live better. How? By transforming our cities. We need electric vehicles. Electric buses and cars produce less pollution, less noise, and less carbon. We won't be able to stop climate change without them. Electric vehicles still need power plants, car factories, and big highways, which all cause carbon emissions. We can also help by making our cities more compact. With services, workplaces, and homes all in the same neighborhoods, people won't need to travel as much by car. We need to redesign streets with bike lanes and bus lanes. We need trains and sidewalks. We need to make it easy for people to get around the city without ever needing a car. Trains, buses, and bicycles are less expensive than cars, batteries, and highways. That means more funds for schools, parks, and healthcare. We'll save so much money on transportation that we could build tens of thousands of new hospitals worldwide every year. It is time for our cities to become resilient, healthy, affordable, equitable, safe, and, most of all, sustainable. Let's build them. Learn more about the possible scenarios and their outcomes in the new report from ITDP and UC Davis, The Compact City Scenario Electrified, the only way to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
So hopefully that was some good context to set us up for the panel now, where I think we'll go into a little bit more depth about how are we actually going to meet these goals? How are we going to make sure that we keep the number of private vehicles on the road to a minimum? And what are we doing to really move towards more public transportation, walking and cycling, and again, more compact city land use development? So with that, I want to invite Ben Welly from WRI, our partner, to the stage to introduce the panel.
Thank you, Heather, for the excellent presentation on the report, and you'll be joining our panel too. So I'm just going to ask if our panelists can come up here to the stage. Heather, Rosa, and Pawan. And I'm going to get myself organized here. Sit in anywhere you want. So, good. Well, I mean, why don't I get a feel for the audience first, and so we kind of know what kind of folks do we have here? Are there folks representing city governments in the audience? National governments? Private sector? Great. Public transport agencies? Okay, great. Walking and cycling advocates? All of us? Everybody raise their hand, yeah. Climate transport experts? Or self-proclaimed experts? Uh-huh. Well, good. Well, it's good to have everyone here in a room. It's a real room with real people to talk about real issues that definitely they've been real issues for the last 2 years, even though we've been trying to deal with all of these things virtually, many of us. But we're going to just take about 40 or so minutes to talk about these things, and we'll solicit some questions from the audience as well during this time. So I just, why don't you guys introduce yourselves first? So Pawan, why don't you start?
Thank you, Ben. A very good morning to all of you, and it's great to be here in person, right? I am Pavan Mulukutla. I'm the director of the Urban Mobility Program at WRI India, looking after electric mobility, road safety, and public transport. Yeah, thank you.
And Heather, we know.
I think I introduced myself.
Yes. Rosa?
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Maria Rosa Munoz. I'm a senior researcher at the Wuppertal Institute for Climate, Energy, and Environment. Some of you might know it. And there I'm coordinating the activities with Latin American cities. And in the case of Solutions Plus, which is the project that I will introduce today, I'm coordinating the activities with Latin American cities, in particular with Quito and Montevideo in Uruguay. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I'm just to reiterate who I am. I'm Ben Welly. I'm Director of Integrated Transport at World Resources Institute, working in our Sustainable Mobility program, which is advancing public transport, walking, cycling, electrification in the transport sector, but how we can do that also in a sustainable way. So that's really the essence of what we're trying to get at here today, especially as we look to the next climate change conference in Egypt this fall. Pawan, why don't I start with you? Heather's presentation showed us we definitely need to electrify. We need to do that on a very significant scale. That needs to get started on a much faster pace. But we also need significant growth of public transport and walking and cycling. Or in places like India, it's not maybe about reducing vehicle travel, but preventing further growth, preventing growth from the baseline in vehicle travel. Public transport is one of the key ways to do that. It's also the most efficient and way to get around, and it's provides equal access to opportunities. So I guess I'm making a statement there, but what's my question? In India, there's been sort of a lack of investment in public transport, but maybe particularly with bus transport. And we've seen sort of drops with the pandemic and ridership. So I'm wondering, what kind of work are you doing in India and with the national government, to address some of these shortfalls? And can India be put on the right track in terms of its pathway on vehicle travel?
Sure. Thank you, Ben. I think one of the biggest things that has happened through this pandemic is the focus that has come back to public transportation. I think India did launch a national mission, which was known as JNNURM way back in 2008-9, that time, which was deploying buses across multiple cities. But through the electrification, I think the focus has come back again on public transportation. We have actually two schemes in place at the national level. There is the FAME scheme, which is the National Electric Mobility Mission by the Government of India, and it's talking about investments of roughly about $1.2 billion in subsidy for deployment of electric vehicles across all segments. We are talking about two-wheelers, three-wheelers, buses, and focus specifically on buses. Roughly about 7,500 electric buses to be deployed across various cities. We so far have seen in more than over 15 cities in India, 1,000 buses are already on the roads. We are going to see another 1,000 in the next few months. And recently, the government of India launched the largest e-bus tender of 5,500 buses. And that tender got closed, and the bidders have been shortlisted, and we'll start seeing the deployment of electric buses shortly on the ground. In addition, many of the cities on their own at the sub-national level are talking about deploying buses. Mumbai recently closed a tender of 900 double-decker buses. We have never seen the per kilometer rate so low, and that's going to come. They also recently closed on 2,100 electric buses that will be deployed over the next 2 years. So we are seeing this transition is actually kind of, in a way, very beneficial for public transportation. Before the pandemic, roughly about 70 million trips on a daily basis are on buses. So that is the scale we are talking about in India, literally moving so many countries. If you look at the population in Europe or in some of the other countries, 70 million trips. And imagine what is this doing? 70 million trips is providing access to vulnerable sections of society to access jobs, opportunities, education, healthcare. I think really without public transportation, I don't think India can literally survive. And I think that realization has been there. And I think with electrification, this national scheme, it's really, really been reinforced more effectively. That's one part of the electrification story we are seeing. So we see a huge momentum. And based upon the support, of course, through TUMI, bus mission, and through various ministries, it's been great that now they are talking about saying that we did this tender for 5,500 buses. Let's do the next 10,000 buses, and that discussion is going on by the by the federal government and the Niti Aayog, which is the national think tank of Government of India. In addition, the Urban Development Ministry, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, actually has come up with a scheme which was announced last year to really deploy 20,000 buses to the tune of investment of roughly about $5 billion USD. And they're going to give the subsidies in 108 cities in India where buses don't even exist, bus services. And this is really going to be your either CNG or diesel buses, but we are seeing that there is a parallel scheme to really even reinforce public transportation. So we are talking about roughly about anywhere between 20 to 30,000 buses, literally in the next 3-4 years. We also need to realize these are not just additional buses; these are also replacing buses which, due to pandemic, we hadn't been able to do anything for last 2-3 years. So the public transportation, great part is back as a focus. The federal schemes are in place, but also a lot of action is needed at the subnational level because transport in India is a state subject where states really need to deploy those services. And there are challenges where learnings, platforms like this, have really been helpful to understand the new technologies. We are talking about understanding the impact of battery conditions in high temperatures, high humidity. How would battery degradation really impact the operations, right? Where do you really place the charging infrastructure? And I think these learnings from peer-to-peer learnings with different cities, the coalitions are playing a huge role to really ensure that we become successful. And I think this is a learning not just for India, I would say. It's pretty much across the entire Southeast Asia, and of course learnings in Africa as well, that how do we really take these learnings that are coming from different cities on how to plan the routes, how should we deploy, really translating a national scheme into action. I think that's the big thing what's happening right now in India, and it's a big learning for other cities. It's also learning for India to also learn from cities which have really gone at a scale to see how they are addressing some of these challenges. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, let me ask a follow-up to that. We at WRI have this program or project we're calling Reimagining Public Transport. Now that's a kind of a fancy word, I guess, but right now, public transport is facing a crisis, right? Or a long crisis, perhaps. A lot of cities in the global south don't receive operating subsidies. So this is something I understand is on the table in India. Do you think there's a prospect for more robust operating subsidies, if we want to call them subsidies, just support to public transport in order to provide that, basic public transport provision that people can, and some people have this right to mobility, I suppose, but in order to do that, we need to fund it, right? So what's the prospect, or what is the outlook for this kind of operating support for public transport?
Yeah. In fact, I find it very unfortunate that we have to say the word subsidy. I feel that itself is quite misleading because if I was a private operator and I had the luxury and freedom to really do whatever I want to, the way I want to operate in a city, I would be profitable from day one. But I think we forget that it is a necessity and it is a service that needs to be provided by the government. So this whole intention of even wanting to break even or even be profitable doesn't really shouldn't be a point of discussion at all, right? And subsidy, coming back to subsidies when we are talking about, I think it is extremely, extremely essential. We have seen data after data in so many cities that you really need viability gap funding. There's always certain break even that will happen with the fare box revenue and through advertisements. But I don't see any city which will not really need subsidy. I mean, we are very happy to give subsidies to metro, right, to operate, to the rail system. But when it comes to buses, we always say that, oh, we really need to give subsidy to buses. I think really that mind shift is really needed to say that, to begin with, we need programs or we need schemes which ensure that it is integral part of the national scheme or the state scheme, wherever it's coming from. And we have started seeing that in both the programs that I talked about for the electric buses and the non-electric bus schemes, they are, for the first time, we are seeing that the business model itself have shifted. It's moved away from outright purchase to really moving towards giving subsidies for the operations. And we are also seeing states taking proactive action to really give that funding, the viability gap, to really cover the gap in the difference between the revenue earned versus the operating cost as the viability gap funding. We have seen that it's happened, that realization has come in, but we also feel that it could be a little bit more structured because it's done really on an annual basis, but rather it should be really like a program which says that, okay, we are going to give subsidy for next 5 to 10 years, and that way it gives confidence in operating the public transport system in India. And I would say that this model of viability gap funding or subsidy for operations is a practice I think I'm seeing in Jakarta, where they're really talking about that. We're also seeing in some of the cities in discussion in Southeast Asia, where this concept that we need to give operational subsidy is really percolating, and I think that's a great start.
Great, that's great to hear. I mean, if some of these problems with public transports are left to fester, I just don't see how we can meet our climate goals, right? So this is just, I hope that some of these do come to materialize in India. So it's great to hear about that. Heather, let's move to a different mode of transport, cycling and walking too, maybe. But I know in particular, ITDP is running this Cycling Cities campaign. The numbers that we saw from you are going to require quite a bit of growth in cycling rates. I want to plug too, there's some other scenarios out there that are great, like Tumi's transport climate scenario, which talks about some of the specific growth around cycling that's needed. WRI has our State of Climate Action report where we talk about, reducing mode share from its baseline from 4 to 14% by 2030. But in order to do that, we need to shift a lot of these trips to bike. And it's a great mode. You get out there, it's healthier, you get to experience fresh air, and it's seeing somewhat of a renaissance or momentum from the global pandemic in cities putting down emergent bike facilities and so forth. But I wonder what's the outlook? How are we looking on cycling, and what are some things that might be giving some indication of where we're going?
Sure. So happy to talk about the Cycling Cities campaign, something we're very excited about at ITDP. I also just want to say it's great to work with partners on the e-bus mission. For those of you that haven't checked out the very cool electric bus being painted outside, that is part of the Tumi initiative that we are all partnering on to really promote e-buses in cities around the world. So an exciting thing that you can learn about more outside with our partners here. But yeah, we're, in the pandemic, we did see a lot of tension within public transport, but what we did see that was positive is more understanding about the role of cycling as a truly complete climate solution. Not only does it help us take emissions out of the sector, but it's also an autonomous vehicle, the original autonomous vehicle that anybody can get on anytime, any place, and get to their destination alone and not have to get in a car, not have to get in public transportation. And, recently in many cities and many places around the world, it's assumed to be a mode of transportation that is only for the poor. And we really need to change that around. We need cities to understand that this is not a transportation mode for the poor, but it's really one of the best modes of transportation that we have, not for long distances, but for short distances. And with the introduction of the e-bike, electric bikes, we're seeing more and more interest in bicycles, which is just really great. So part of that move to electrification also really needs to include promotion of electric bikes. So with all of this momentum that we saw during the pandemic with cities like Bogota and Mexico City and Jakarta, cities around the world putting in new bike lanes when there was little traffic on the streets and you could actually paint new bike lanes and take over space on roads without as much pushback, there was a lot of momentum, a lot of understanding that bikes are really a solution not just for the past, but for the future. So at ITDP, we wanted to take advantage of that momentum. So we launched our Cycling Cities campaign. Please check it out online on our website or elsewhere to try and take the momentum that we're seeing in cities and really help the rest of the world understand that this trend is something serious and something real, something that we need more investment in. And here we are in Germany and in Europe, we see so many beautiful bike lanes and cities that really focus on biking. Copenhagen and Amsterdam are often the poster child cities for cycling, but we wanted to make sure that there was more understanding that it's not just Copenhagen, it's not just Amsterdam that are doing these great things, but it's cities throughout the global south. So our goal was to get 25 cities to sign up for our campaign. We're now at 28 cities and we keep getting more interest, but I think we're going to draw the line. But we only have 2 cities in Europe and only 1 city in the United States. The rest of the cities are located from around the world. So Jakarta, Mexico City, Kampala, Rio. We have cities from all over the world that have committed to implementing more protected bike lanes in their cities. And we know that at the core, if you want to have success in cycling in your cities, you have to start with protected bike lanes. If people don't feel safe on a bicycle in their cities, they won't ride. But if you create protected bike lanes, they will get on bikes. And you can't just have short bike lanes that go from nowhere to nowhere. You actually need to have complete networks of cycle lanes that go throughout your cities. So with this cohort of now more than 25 cities, our goal is to have 25 million more people located near safe cycle lanes in the world by the year 2025. And with these cities, that's a completely reasonable assumption. We know it's possible. We just need to, again, build more bike lanes so that more people have access. We also know that bike share can be a huge game changer, and more cities are interested in implementing bike share, which can be a great private-public partnership. We have great systems that have been successful already that are continuing to grow. The system of Velib in Paris was one of the first, but we have systems in Mexico City, Bogota, New York City that are expanding their services. And the more bikes you have on the streets, the more the city understands the importance of building protected bike lanes. So it's a virtual virtuous cycle of positive reinforcement. The other thing that we wanted to do with this campaign is to show that, again, there's a real demand and trend from cities so that there can be more investment in safe cycle lanes. And we often see that cities grow their roads, but they forget to, as they're making new roads, to actually include protected bike lanes or dedicated lanes for buses. And we need to make sure and change that trend. So another thing that we want to do with this demand of these 28 cities is to show that there's more interest from and more demand for development banks, bilateral banks, other investors that cities work with to invest in, again, safe, protected bike lanes and lanes that are truly create networks at scale so that people can get from one place to another. And all of this, of course, needs to be in concert with public transportation. Bikes can't always get you from your one destination to another for longer distances, but if they can serve as first and last mile solutions in combination with public transportation, then you have a full solution. And often, most trips are actually under 2-3 miles, 5 kilometers, and so they really are reachable with bicycles, especially if we think about using e-bikes, which makes it all much easier to do. So yeah, bikes are a part of the solution for sure.
Great. So exciting to hear about the Cycling Cities campaign. And I mean, we do need to shift to bicycling quite a bit, right? So let's hope we can make a lot of progress in the next couple years on that front. Rosa, why don't we turn to you? Let's shift maybe to hear a little bit about some of work on e-mobility in cities. I know under your Solutions Plus work, you've got a number of e-mobility projects in cities across the globe that range from, electric two-wheelers to electric buses and even electric minibuses, which I think is really interesting to hear about. But do you want to describe, sort of how in terms of e-mobility solutions in cities are we looking, in terms of meeting potential climate goals? And what projects might you have as examples of sort of good signs?
Yes, of course. So let me tell you a little bit the perspective of the pilot. So you're talking more from a global perspective, from a more macro perspective. And what we are doing is implementing pilot projects from an urban living lab perspective. So, and it has been very interesting. The Solutions Plus project is implemented in 10 cities around the globe, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, and in Europe as well. And one of the components that we are focusing on is supporting the development of e-mobility solutions locally. So for that, we have been providing seed funding for, I think it's almost 15 startups that are working with us, developing solutions locally. So that means that we are producing locally from e-bicycles in Kigali, for example, to a multi-purpose van in the Philippines or retrofitting in Kathmandu, going from also three-wheelers that not only focus on passenger transport, but also on logistics. And that's also an important aspect that I would like to mention. And so there we have this group of local innovators. But the idea of the Solutions Plus project is also, and this has been one of the main learnings that we have had in these 2 years of project, the collaboration networks that we've built around these solutions. And it's not only the vehicle, it's not only the vehicle that it's being developed by these startups, but it's also collaborating with the local authorities. The local authorities are our main counterpart. And so, for example, the regulations that you need for light electric vehicles to go on the ground, where are they going to circulate? Are they going to challenge or to threaten the cyclist or the pedestrians? So there are a lot of things that still need to be understood and develop, and that's what we're doing together with the municipalities, for example, and in many cases because you also have the issue of homologation. So these new vehicles that are being produced locally also need to be homologated. So there are a lot of challenges that we are facing in order to make these pilots happen. So we are 2 years since we started the project now, and we have already some prototypes. But if you don't have the regulations on the ground, then those vehicles cannot be deployed. So there are a lot of challenges that we're learning. But it has been a very rich process as well because of the collaborations that I mentioned. We have been very positively surprised because in all the countries, in all the cities, in all the regions that we are working we found very interesting startups. So you might think that in some places you will not find so much development in the field of e-mobility. But in all countries where we work, we found very interesting initiatives, very interesting startups. And more than that, we have on the way identified some other things. So for example, we are working directly with the assemblers, with the producers of the vehicles. But we have identified, for example, projects that are working on second life batteries, that are working on charging solutions for this type of vehicles. So we have been, in the way, it has been a very interesting learning process, learning curve that we have been doing. And so what I would like to extract from this is that the actors are there. So I think what we could do to support and to expand this process and to scale up this type of pilots is to connect the dots, to connect the collaboration between one and another and introduce one to each other in order to establish these networks that could go, for example, not only on the vehicle, but we are, for example, also working on the integration. So what Heather just mentioned, so we are working on the first and last mile connectivity and also on the first and last mile logistics to electrify those. No? So that has been very important for us. And yeah, I think that's one of the learnings that we're getting from the Solutions Plus project.
I wonder, a lot of when we read about electrification in the news, it's often really about light-duty vehicles, the personal, four-wheeled vehicle that people use for their, generally for private vehicle travel. But what I think is interesting is you're covering these things like 2- and 3-wheelers and even minibuses and things. And I just, how those modes are part of the motorized fleet, global fleet of vehicles. In many geographies, they're a very significant share, like in India with auto rickshaws, or in Africa with 2-wheelers, in Vietnam with 2-wheelers. So I wonder, what is, are these, do you see these pilots as being successful and something that can be scaled up significantly in the, coming years?
I definitely see so. There are a lot of challenges, as I mentioned. The startups we are working with are in very different stages. So some of them started developing the prototypes because of the call we launched. Some others have been working on this type of vehicles already for a while. But we need to provide the enabling frameworks. If the enabling frameworks are there for the business models, for example, for the startups, and then also the regulatory framework for them to circulate, to sell, and to homologate the vehicles and so on, then of course it could happen. But so that's why we need to work from very different angles, and not only from one, but from very different angles, talking to all the different stakeholders so that we can really connect all the dots.
Okay, great. Well, let's talk business models just for a second, because we'll come back to Heather and Pawan here too on e-buses, I think. But what are the, what maybe with 2- and 3-wheelers, or what are some of the business model challenges or solutions that you're seeing that could potentially be scaled?
Yeah. So now, for example, I'm going to talk about the specific case of Quito in Ecuador, where I'm from, and that's one of the pilots that we are implementing, and that's so there we are working specifically on light electric freight vehicles. The idea is to support the municipality in the zero emissions historic center that they want to implement, and for that we want to pilot these light electric freight vehicles. The challenge that we are having now, we have been in conversation with many different stakeholders. So we have, for example, been in contact with logistics service providers. And they still don't grasp the change. So that's an important work that we need to do. We need to showcase, and also coming back to the point that Heather mentioned before, showcasing other examples in Latin America about this transition, about the transition from a diesel freight van to e-cargo bikes, for example. Those examples from that already exist in many Latin American cities. So those examples are something that we can present as something that they could learn from, for example. But that's a work that we still need to do, to show them how they can adapt their operations and how can they benefit. And that because the vehicles are smaller, it doesn't mean that they will not be as efficient as the larger vehicles are. They just need to understand better how it will work in order to implement in their operations. So that's, for example, one of the models that we are trying to implement. So in terms of logistics, it's a collaborative cross-docking platform, which with actors that are still a little bit traditional in their practices, it's a bit challenging, but we do think that it would be possible doing some capacity building and some exchange with other cases in the region. It would be possible to move to that business model. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And maybe we'll go to some questions from the audience next, but before we do that, you mentioned the Tumi eBus mission, Heather. Pawan and Heather, both of you maybe want to comment on how can we change and scale up new business models to roll out these electric buses? Because we're seeing electric bus here, electric bus there, but we need electric bus everywhere, right? So, what's your experience maybe in sort of seeing how this might happen? So either one of you can go first, and then it's a.
I think there are a couple of business models that's being discovered, right? One is, of course, the national scheme backed. That's one version. The other models would be bringing in new stakeholders, right? Basically, you're trying to see how do I mitigate risk. And if you have utility companies come in, or you have the battery companies come in, it will really help in understanding the reducing the price points. For example, 2-3 models that come to my mind is one is right now, many of the cities are moving away from the outright purchase to what we call as the gross cost contract, which is basically paying on the assured kilometers. One thing they're also doing is increasing the contract duration, right? We are saying that with electric buses, there is this opportunity to increase the contract duration, which used to be 8 years, 10 years. We are seeing 14 years, 15 years. I think that really then helps in bringing down the price point. The other model that we have seen is also demand aggregation across multiple cities. Instead of each city saying that we will deploy 50 here, 100 here, 200 here, if you say that, a couple of cities came in together and then they said we'll do a central procurement, that scale of economies will also help reduce the price point. We saw that recently in India, where 9 cities were invited, the top 9 metropolitan cities, and 5 cities participated for these 5,500 buses, and the price parity came down, that the electric bus is much more cheaper now than the ICE buses. I mean, that transformation we were thinking will happen in 2025, 2026. We are seeing that it's already happening now. Other way to really do is also to set up this entity, a financial institution, which would really buy the buses and would actually give on lease to all these different cities. And that way, there is this support that comes in this financial institutes through the national scheme and through other equity fund also. Very interestingly, recently we saw in India one company which is an equity funded company getting into deployment of electric buses. I mean, we have never heard that any one of the equity fund managers would want to get into electric buses, but they got it. They are able to operate at profitability because on a per kilometer basis. I think the way to do this is three things. One is you're looking at where is the funding available, right? The second is which is the institution to really deploy that funding. How do you really look at the mechanisms to really create how the flow of the funding is? And then, of course, the business models kick in on how do you really want to. So I think there's a lot of learning, even from Latin American cities. I think Bogota has been doing that. Many of the other cities are exploring that. You actually see a lot of innovation, which was never seen before in the public transport space, which is happening right now in the electric bus space. So there are a lot of examples where it is happening. I know in Indonesia,